Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm going to share a question the narrative video with you today. And the topic that I decided on was books that help me escape the matrix. And no, what I'm going to say first of all is that I do not believe that we live in a simulation. When I say matrix, what I am referring to is the programming that we receive from birth on up that teaches us and conditions us to believe lies. Lies about history, lies about science, and lies about the nature of the very world that we live in and in our Creator. Now, I'm a bit of a bookworm, so it was really hard for me to narrow it down to just a few books. And right now I have 7, unless I decide in the middle of this video that I'm going to add another one or maybe another 2. And it doesn't mean that there aren't other really good books out there. What it means, though, is that these are the books that have had the most impact on how my outlook has changed and how my blinders have come off, and to just, the hashtag realize. Well, these are the books that help me to decide that. And no, I wish that this was my bookcase, but I don't have this many books. I wish I did. Now, a lot of the books that I mentioned today, you probably have heard me at least mention them in other videos, and sometimes I actually read excerpts from them, and that's why I'm sharing them with you today, because if they're that important that I'm going to put them in my videos, it means that they have had a huge impact on me, and I have gleaned a lot of information from them. The first one that I'm going to share with you is probably going to come as a surprise to a lot of you because it's probably not what you were expecting to find in this book list. But I have to tell you that The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto was my wake-up call, because once you realize the conditioning that is happening in these schools, you are more open to accepting the lies that we have been fed, or maybe not accepting the lies, but accepting the fact that we have been lied to, once you see just how nefarious the history of American education really was. I do recommend that you look for this copy of it, because this copy I originally got at the library and was able to read it. And this copy is actually phone book size. It is so packed with information. It will take you a really long time to get through it, but it is so worth it. Unfortunately, though, I'm having a hard time finding it to buy, and if I do find it, I'm sure that it will be really expensive just because of the sheer size of it and the fact that it's so hard to find. So in the meantime, this is the copy that I actually have at home. This is only volume 1. Um, John Taylor Gatto unfortunately passed away several years ago, and his editor, David James Rodriguez, is the one who actually came out with this copy of his Underground History of American Education. But it's not the entire thing. It's only volume 1. And so far, they haven't come out with any other volumes, and it's been several years, and I'm just like waiting anxiously, and I really hope that they release the rest of them. But it will give you a great start on what public education really was all about. And I shouldn't just say was, it's not past tense, it's is what it is all about. When I was growing up, I always loved the song Another Brick in the Wall, and I didn't really understand why. Now I'm realizing that it was probably just because there was a little bit of rebellion in me, rebellion against the system, even at that point in time, although I really was very obedient to the system at the same time. But what you see in the video for that song, Another Brick in the Wall, of the students going in looking one way and then coming out looking completely different and very much similar to each other, is really what well, at least one aspect of the schooling is all about. We're not joking when we say that the schools were created to make obedient factory workers. They were actually modeled after the Prussian model of education. The Prussian model of education was to create obedient soldiers. So what they did was they just went in and they took all of the things that they thought were successful for the Prussians, and they plopped them into our school system, because it was coming about at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And yes, they did want to create obedient factory workers and, in essence, obedient citizens who would basically do whatever it was that they were told to do. And it goes far beyond that. There is a caste system involved in the public education system. And it's not even just the Prussian model. That is just one aspect of it. I highly recommend that you get this book because, again, once you realize how we have been programmed, even in school, you are going to be more accepting of the fact that, yeah, we're lied to about pretty much everything. And school is really just one of the major places that it starts. The next book I'm going to recommend to you is Exposing the Expositions, 1851 to 1915 by Howdy McCoskey. And in this book, he gives a close examination of the World's Fairs and all of the ludicrous history that comes right along with them. He focuses mainly on the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. However, he touches on not only the World's Fairs, but also the Crystal Palaces and all of the, again, I'm going to say it, ludicrous history behind them and all of the mysterious fires that seemingly take place with them, how these buildings are supposedly moved. And really, it just builds upon what many people are looking at as a possible mud flood or a reset that took place at some point in our history that is being covered up. He gives so much information. And I have to say, this is a relatively short book, but it is chock full of information. I highly recommend it if you have any interest at all in the mud floods, the reset, the World's Fairs, anything at all. Pick this book up. It's a really easy read, but it's fascinating. The next book that I'm going to recommend, I absolutely have to recommend it because I use it in so many of my videos. I mention it, I read excerpts from it. This is another one that is fascinating. This is another giant book. Okay, it's going to take you a long time to read it. And I have to admit that it's so full of information that you will have to read it and reread it and reread it. Mine is highlighted and I have notes in it, and I still have to go back and read it again. But it is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne. And if you read the subtitle, it says, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. And here's one of the things that I find so fascinating about the Genesis 6 conspiracy. Gary Wayne, the author, is a Christian, and he comes at it from a Christian perspective. However, he also examines the topic from the histories of other civilizations. For example, the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians. The list goes on. And unfortunately, this is why a lot of Christians actually have a problem with him, because they don't like him examining the whole idea of the Nephilim and giants from something other than a biblical perspective, which again, the book is grounded in the biblical perspective. But you know how in history, a lot of times here in the US, we'll learn just about our part of the world in a certain period of time, or maybe we'll learn about Europe and a certain period of time, but we don't really touch on what's going on in other parts of the world. And a lot of times people will say, well, that just doesn't make any sense. We should be learning about what's going on all over the world at the same period of time. Well, that's exactly what he's doing. He is examining what was going on in other parts of the world. And yes, so that does mean from other cultures, and examining what their books have to say. And it really does give an excellent picture of what exactly happened during the time of the Watchers and really what it's leading up to now. Unearthing the Lost Worlds of the Cloud Eaters by Stephen Quayle and Dr. Thomas R. Horn is the next book that I am going to recommend. And again, this is another book that I often read excerpts from in my videos because it has so much brilliant insight, and there's a lot of really excellent research that goes into this book here. Now, it does talk about the Smithsonian cover-ups with the giants. It goes into portals. It goes into the possible pre-Adamic civilization. I will say, though, that this was written from a heliocentric perspective. So there are some chapters that really tend to focus on like the planet Nibiru and other planets out there in the solar system. And yeah, the first time that I got the book, I read it and I'm just like, when I read it. Now, whenever I reread the book, which I've reread it a few times, I kind of just skip those chapters because I can't find anything useful out of them, especially knowing what I know about the shape of the earth now. I'm hoping that the authors come around to what biblical cosmology actually tells us, but who knows? I once thought the earth was a sphere too. So, you never know. But that doesn't mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. Those chapters are just a minute part of the actual book itself, and it is still worth getting. In fact, one of my favorite parts of the books is talking about how the Native American legends tell us that there are actually giants living in stasis that can be accessed through these portals, or sometimes I think it was Steve Quayle calls them stargates, that these giants in stasis can be accessed through them, and that at some point in the future, they will wake up, so to speak, in order to come back. And that's what a lot of people are talking about with when Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be at the coming of the Son of Man. And a lot of people believe that it means that, yes, there are going to be giants that return in those days. And in fact, I think that the giants are still here. They're just not out in the open. And the hybrids and everything that was going on in antediluvian times is going to come back right before, the return of Christ. Birthright is yet another book that I mention all the time and that I read from all the time. And again, I'm going to say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can see right from the cover, it is written from a heliocentric perspective. And yes, unfortunately, the heliocentric model, the heliocentric theory, does come into play in several portions of this book. But the rest of it is so well written and so well researched that again, I'm able to just kind of either ignore those portions, or sometimes if you can actually fit it in better with a biblical worldview, a biblical cosmological worldview, then it actually fits in with heliocentrism. Sometimes it feels like it's reaching too much to put some of these topics in heliocentrism. And you're like, come on, Timothy, wake up. The earth is not a ball. But again, I hope that at one point he will wake up to the truth of it. But especially in this day and age with all of these so-called UFO sightings and UFO disclosures coming out, this would be a fascinating read. He gives some fascinating illustrations about who the Elohim actually are and the fact that they do have their own civilization. We always tend to think of ourselves here on earth as being, the only people, the only sentient beings who have any sort of civilization. But we can tell just from reading the Bible that the Elohim, the heavenly beings who were created before us, yes, they exist, and yes, they have their own civilization. He has his own take on what he thinks the aliens might be. I don't agree with everything that he has to say, but again, that's because he is still coming from the whole perspective of the planets and outer space. And I will say that I still believe that the aliens are demonic. It doesn't mean that they are demons. That is, that's an important distinction. Demons are the disembodied spirits of dead Rephaim. That's what demons are. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, because this is certainly not a disembodied spirit. It has a physical form, but it can be demonic, meaning that it is evil. And that is something that I think that even Timothy would agree upon. Next is the book The Unseen Realm, Recovering the Supernatural Worldview of the Bible by Dr. Michael Heiser, who also unfortunately passed away not too long ago. This book was my first introduction into the idea of the divine council. The fact that our Father in heaven, he has his own council up there with him that does consist of other heavenly beings that he created. So no, they are not gods like our God or like our Father in heaven. He created these beings. They are the Elohim. They are what we might call angels, but they are seated with him. And there is a divine council, and it's even mentioned in the book of Psalms. And there are allusions to it in even the book of Genesis when it says, let us make man in our image. So this really was my first introduction into that. And I will admit that at first, when I heard this theory, or I should say, I read about this theory, actually, to be quite honest, I watched his lectures on YouTube about it first, and then I bought his book. But at first, it did make me uncomfortable because just the idea of this divine council of these lowercase g gods reminded me too much of polytheism. And I'm like, whoa, I'm not a polytheist. But the thing is that this is not about worshiping these lowercase g gods. This is just about there are created beings who are in a different realm than we are. They are walking with the Lord. And yes, some of them are in a council with him. And that's really what a large portion of this book is about. Now, the last book is also by Dr. Michael Heiser, and it is called Reversing Hermon, Enoch, the Watchers, and the Forgotten Mission of Jesus Christ. And what this book is about the Watchers who descended on Mount Hermon and how they brought all of this forbidden technology to the people who were living there at the time. They married the women, they had children with them, and what they were trying to do was they were trying to create man or some form of man in their own image, just as God created man in his image. And one of his biggest focal points of this book is the idea that, first of all, the ancient Hebrews didn't believe that Adam and Eve eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was the only sin that happened at that point. The sin was also another major portion of the fall happened because of these watchers that came down and basically contaminated the human race in what they did. So when it mentions the forgotten mission of Jesus Christ, when Jesus came and was born of a human, he took the form of a human also because there were entities that were trying to create things that were not entirely human. And so Jesus coming and being born of a human woman was God's way of just fixing that once and for all, because we know that Satan and his minions like to do everything they can to corrupt God's image. And so when Jesus came here, yes, it also had a lot to do with Mount Hermon, and not just with what Adam and Eve did in the garden. So hopefully these book recommendations gave you some ideas on some things that you can read up on. You might have read some of them, you might have read all of them, but what I'm hoping is that you can at least get some new topics that you haven't thought about before, because there are so many components to the lies that we have been told. And yes, we can call it a great deception. We have been deceived about everything. And it's not just about one thing, it's all encompassing. So in order to understand that, we need to focus not just on one part of it. We shouldn't just focus on just the mud floods. We shouldn't just focus on Tartaria. We shouldn't just focus on the Nephilim. We need to take a look at everything around us, fit those puzzle pieces together, and yes, I'm going to say it again, real eyes, real eyes, real lies. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.